name is John DeShazier, and I want to welcome you as well as thank you for joining us for a very important conversation on this Juneteenth 2020. Now, we have some very important personnel from the New Orleans Pelicans joining us here for this roundtable discussion. And really, it's more of a conversation than anything, because we understand that America is in a very delicate state right now. And so we want to tackle some of these difficult issues with some of the top people from the New Orleans Pelicans organization. So we have joining us today, Executive Vice President of Basketball Operations, David Griffin, as well as General Manager Trajan Langdon. We also have Vice President of Basketball Operations and Team Development, Swin, and Head Coach Alvin Gentry. So as you approach the state of affairs, and everyone approaches it from different angles, you know, police brutality and reform, social justice, Black Lives Matter, peaceful protests, from different life experiences. Could each of you explain the message that you're attempting to convey to Pelicans players right now? We're going to start with Griff on that one.
So I think, John, one of the things for us that's the most important, and Swin has been really a key component of all of this, is everything has to be based in action steps at this point. So I think more than anything, when we're talking to our players, we're looking for where their passion is and where it is that they want to get involved. I mean, obviously, many of our players have had a lot of direct contact with police in settings that did not go particularly well, quite frankly, and in ways that I'm ashamed of as a white male in this country. The level of privilege we've had has really never become as clear to me as it is now. And our players have been a big part of bringing that clarity to us. And so I think from our perspective, everything we're doing with our players is how do we really do something that's going to affect change? And how do we keep other people from becoming numb to this conversation once all of the protests die down? Because typically these things have a life cycle, and the life cycle of this one has to be different. We absolutely have to win this time.
You know, when Griff mentioned your pivotal role, could you just explain some of the things that you've been encountering?
Yeah, I think our first initial step was as an organization to decide that we needed to not only have our players lead, but to create a safe space for them to be leaders in this space and for us to be able to support them. And I think by us kind of creating and helping them create within the organization this social justice leadership alliance, I think it has made an opportunity for us to look at strategic ways in the community that our players can use their platforms, use their access to try to change the narrative, to try to change whether it's policing tactics, whether it's policy. So the first thing we did was listen to our guys. That's what we wanted, like Griff said, hear their passions, where they want to really dive in, what they care about, and what have been their experiences, and seeing if they're willing to share that. And I think our guys have been really open to that. I think internally they've been talking amongst themselves, which is really good. And I think action steps for us now is to figure out, all right, what do we want to do? We're going back into the season. This doesn't mean we stop. You know, our guys have been asking, well, if we're in Orlando, what can we continue to do? What conversations can we have and still be a part of it? And that's what I love to hear. And I think as our leadership group is here and talking, we want to create those vehicles and make sure those vehicles stay accessible for our guys, even if they're in Orlando, even after the season. And that's, you know, how we're going to move forward with our action steps.
You know, Trajan, what have you found or discovered in your interactions?
I think all of us are the same. We had our initial kind of team group Zoom where we talked about some things, but guys relatively were quiet on the group call. I think several of us shared some different things, some frustrations, some painful emotions that we were going through at the time. But I think generally, initially, guys were just quiet and listening. And I think, like Swin said, they have a group text or a group chat that they've been really talking amongst each other with. And the biggest thing for us right now is just listening. I've had individual calls with players, as I'm sure we all have, where we try to understand where they're coming from, and they're not going to open up until we kind of share where we're coming from, what our feelings are, what we're going through at the time, and then they feel a little bit more comfortable that they're in a safe surrounding, even if it's a one-on-one call, that they can open up and share some feelings, whether it's about themselves or protecting their family or past experiences that they've had. And I think the biggest thing for us is to tell them, like, look, we're listening And we're going to do everything we can to provide that platform for change, not only within our organization, but in New Orleans. And this isn't just lip service, but we're behind you, and we really want to impact and effectuate change in this city and do whatever we can wherever you want to effectuate change too, whether it's doing it in this city or whatever hometown that they live in. So I think that's important, like Swin said, making sure we're listening and we're also impacting in whatever direction they want to go.
You know, Alvin, have you kind of found some of the same things? Because relationship-wise, the coach might be a little bit more hands-on with players. Have they been, I guess, the same with you, or a little bit more forthcoming, or?
I would say pretty much. I think the main thing for me was that I wanted to listen first. I wanted to see where they were. I wanted to, you know, talk to them about their feelings. But the big thing, I think, is that they need to know that I'm 100% behind them. I'm going to support them in every situation, you know, that they're going to be in, or what they want to talk about, what they want to discuss. I'm gonna be very supportive in that thing. I think the group pretty much covered everything else. That, you know, obviously we're going to listen, but this is the thing that we always talked about, is that after the conversations are over, then, you know, where do we go from here? What are the actions that we're going to take to actually, you know, affect change? You know, because we can talk all we want, but the bottom line is that you know, where do we go, and the actions that we're going to take that's going to make a difference in what's going on, and not just talk about it.
You know, when players provide you with personal accounts or situations that they deal with, how do you deal with the emotions that go along with that? Because, you know, it can be a really sensitive situation. And we're talking about guys who aren't accustomed to really leaning on people a lot, I guess, as they grow up through life, because, you know, they're in that, you know, rare percentage of guys who are elite at what they do. And so they're not accustomed to maybe, you know, laying out their emotions or being vulnerable. So how do you deal with that and help navigate them through it?
Well, I think the main thing is that, you know, like I said, you got to listen, but, you know, there is going to be anger, and they've got to be able to express that. I think that, you know, in these situations that we're going through right now, there is a lot of anger. You know, you see a policeman put his knee on a guy's neck, and if you can't get, you know, angry, I mean, absolutely angry about that, then there's something wrong with you, you know. So I think that you got to let them know that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to express that anger. And then you have to have that conversation about, as we keep talking about, where do we go from here? Okay, we're mad. We're pissed off about everything that we're seeing and what's going on. What can we do to affect change, and how do we do that? I think that's the main thing the point that I would like to get across to them when I talk to them, when they express the anger about things that they've seen over the last month, really, you know.
And Swin, are you seeing that? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you know, and I just want to share this. There's not a news story that any of our players can share that we haven't, especially for me, being a Black man or a Black woman, that if you haven't personally experienced it, that somebody in your family has. So for me, I feel like the important thing is to share your experiences, to share, you know, this happened to my brother, this happened to my mother. And I think for our guys, especially our younger guys, it may wake them up a little bit, because they're like, wow, how did you know, the next question is, how did you deal with that? How did your family deal with it? And that's where I see kind of my conversations going, is opening up, like Trajan said, and sharing personal experiences. Allows them the comfort to be able to go down that path and talk more about it.
One of the things from a vulnerability standpoint, you mentioned that word, John, and Swin is somebody who, when we were part of the calls that Trajan referenced, Swin shared that she has a son who's a very young kid right now, and he doesn't even really understand everything that's going on, but she's aware of the fact that she's going to have conversations with him about how he carries himself when he gets pulled over by the police, how he carries himself in settings that I've taken for granted my entire life. I've never once had to think how I carry myself, like think through those situations. And so the other parents on the calls that shared having those conversations, Alvin himself sharing the conversations he's had to have with his sons, This is a very painful thing as a white male who's never had to go through that. So it starts with having a sense of empathy for everyone in this situation. It's not like very clear lines drawn around all of these things. Life is really about a great deal of gray for most of us. And unfortunately, all of our media is so polarized now. We can't have a meaningful discord. We can't have real conversation about how we do affect change, because everyone wants to paint everybody in one category as one way and everybody in another category as another. And I think until you have enough empathy as a human being who has lived with privilege to understand exactly how you've perpetuated systemic racism, even unknowingly, it's going to be really difficult to get very far. It starts with our understanding of the way that it's been perpetuated for years. And if I don't hear the stories that Trajan and Alvin and Swin tell about what their life is like and how they educate their kids versus how everybody else might educate theirs, I don't get to that sense of understanding. So it definitely starts there.
Trajan, when you relay your experiences to the players, do you find that it's an awakening for them, or is it one of those things where, you know, they can't possibly have imagined that might have happened to you? I think Swin kind of referred to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys are educated enough that know that I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and obviously there's not a huge population. And it's a bit distant from the rest of the country, but you know, I come from a biracial background where my mother is Black and my dad is white, and my mom grew up in Bruton, Alabama, and she went to segregated schools growing up back in the 50s. And you know, that's not that long ago. Look, that's my mom. And you know, and I was fortunate enough to have an educated white father that told me and made me aware of, look, you're going to be looked at differently growing up. And it doesn't mean be scared, but it means be aware. Be aware of what your surroundings are. Be aware of who your friends are. Be aware of how you're viewed in different places. And if you feel that you're unsafe, get out of there. And I was very fortunate that I had a white father that understood the differences in the way different people are treated from different backgrounds. So I think that kind of, like I said, when I talk to guys one-on-one on the phone, it kind of brought an awareness of them, like, oh, he went through this as well. And I think sometimes when players look at executives, they just look at them in a place of not where they can really relate to what they're going through. So I kind of wanted to come down to their level and just say, look, these were my experiences growing up. They might not mirror yours, but I did struggle with some of the same things, and some of them were different as well, trying to understand who I was. Am I white? Am I Black? You know, who do I kind of associate myself with? And growing up in Anchorage, Alaska, you know, I was raised in a middle class neighborhood, never needed anything, educated parents who had really good jobs. But look, playing basketball, playing baseball, like the people I was with were from lower class families. And, you know, I was taught not to judge. And I had guys on my baseball teams, guys on my basketball teams when they grew older and we were playing in high school that were selling drugs, were drug kingpins in Anchorage and ended up being drug kingpins in Alaska. And I had to tell myself, look, this is the way of life for them. This is the way they have to survive. Try not to judge, but also understand I couldn't be hanging out with them in the streets, but also they can still be my teammates and I can still be okay with that. So those are different things that I was, you know, I had to deal with growing up as well and try to figure out and understand. And you know, it's different. You know, sharing those things with the players. And I think I can come on common ground with them and they can feel a little bit more comfortable sharing those things as well with me.
Yeah. You know, I mean, just to interject a little bit, you know, I live that life that Trajan's talking about. You know, I grew up in small town in North Carolina where I did not even attend an integrated school until I was in middle school. So I drove past 2 schools to get to my school, 12 miles away, you know, 13 miles away, when I had a school basically, you know, less than a quarter of a mile from my house that I grew up in. But, you know, wasn't allowed to go to those schools really, and didn't start attending those schools. So you know, you go through all the situations. You know, the first school I was in, there was only 8 of us. And so, you know, obviously, you know, the bell rang and you try to get out as quick as you possibly can. All the, you know, all the things that you faced, you know, as one of the few minorities in the school. And then everything kind of changed when the sporting season started, the basketball season and things like that. Then all of a sudden, you were a little more accepted in those situations, only in those situations from the sporting situation. But after the sporting events was over, it's the same thing. You know, you go back to your side of town, they go back to theirs, and that's it. So the guys talk about, you know, I tell stories about that all the time, and they're incredulous, you know, that number one, you didn't go to an integrated school, or you didn't go to a school that was, you know, multiracial, and then the fact that you had all of these limitations. There was places that we couldn't go. You couldn't dare walk in and eat in my hometown. You know, it was impossible. But the bottom line is that we got to a point where, you know, my graduating class, which in 1972-73 was an amazing situation. We had a Black student body president. We had a Black senior class president. I was the vice president of the student body, and we had a Black homecoming queen in 1972-73. So we just had a Zoom call the other night with a bunch of, you know, graduates of that class, and we said, you know, even in those situations in that hometown, we were just kind of classmates. You know, we were just kind of classmates, and those things happen, which I don't know if it could even happen today. I mean, I'm amazed when I look back and think about what happened in those situations, but I don't know if it could even happen today, really. You know, the whole situation with the you know, what happened as far as, and these were elections that were done in a school that had, you know, 1,200 students, and 183 of them were Black, you know.
You know, Alvin, rolling back for a second, that can be a scarring process where I'm accepted on Friday night, Saturday night, whatever it is, playing basketball, but Monday morning, I'm not the same person. Was there a period of bitterness for you, and was that something you had to work through?
Oh, yeah, definitely, I think. You know, I mean, it's no different than if you look back, I had, you know, uncles that served in the military, and, you know, they fought for this country, and when they got back home, couldn't even ride the bus, or couldn't even, you know, go to the restaurants that they fought to defend. So, yeah, it makes you bitter, I think, you know, and even when I look back at it today, it makes you angry that you fought for this country just like everybody else did, and did everything you could to make it better for the people living here. But when you come back home, you ride in the back of the bus, and you can't do certain things. And that's a bitterness that I think doesn't go away.
You know, Swin, you've got a young son, a growing, strapping young man. And so, you know, from that standpoint, have you, I guess, will you know kind of when you need to have the conversation with him, so to speak? Because I say this, my son's 27, just turned 27 the other day. And so when I see him, and I was relaying this message to somebody, this story to somebody the other day, when I see him and we go our separate ways, always, you know, we give each other a fist pound. I hug him, kiss him on the forehead, and I say, be careful. And I'm not talking about look both ways before you cross the street. He knows what I'm talking about. We've had that conversation. Have you picked a time to have that conversation, or is it just going to have to be something that's kind of organic?
You know, JD, my prayer is not to have the conversation. My prayer is that we get to a point where I don't have to have that conversation. But right now, I am laser focused. I have laser focus. I'm strategic about the fact of talking directly to mothers, because I feel like with any mom, there's a common thread, right? We love our kids, we birth our kids. You have this idea of what you want them to be. And so what I've tried to do is to use my platform to let other mothers know who are not Black mothers or brown mothers that will have to worry about their kids in that certain way, to start imagining how they can educate their kids so that my kid is not the kid that's left out. So the kids can be better as they grow older and their future is better. if that makes sense. Because too often, for instance, I'll just use an example, colleagues of mine, friends of mine who are white have reached out to me and said, you know what, I didn't think about things this way until you mentioned Saint being so small now, and eventually he's going to get 6'6", maybe like his dad, and you have a new, you have new worries about him because people will be scared of him just because of his size and his skin color. Like, they don't think along those lines, a lot of what Griff said. And so part of my platform and the reason for me speaking out always is to try to use examples to make people understand why it's so important to try to break down these biases and different things in kids while they're younger. And so that hopefully they won't live in the same world we're living in today. But I don't want to have the talk. I don't want to talk to my son about running outside late for a jog. If he wants to go for a jog, I want him to feel free to do that. I don't want to talk to him about having to be at school and watch your tone, or when the police pull you over at any point, make sure your hands are on the steering wheel at this certain thing, turn your phone on, do this. Like, why should we have those different steps with our kids? And that's what we have right now. We've had it forever. You know, it's been years, hundreds of years now. We've had these same talks that have been passed down from generation to generation. And I want to break that cycle. And the only way we break that cycle is not Black people talking to Black people. It is Black people, white people talking to white people, Black people talking to white people, Asian people, Hispanic people. Like, there's so much that we have to do, but we can do it. And I think everyone has their ears open and their eyes open right now. And that's why this time is so pivotal to have these discussions like we're having here today.
And I've had those talks. You know, I have two sons, you know, 120, 122. And, you know, they're a product of a biracial marriage also. You know, I know Trajan can relate, but, you know, as they're growing up, they're cute little kids, you know, like when they're Saint's age and, you know, they're 5, 6, 7 years old, 10 years old, they're just cute little kids. And then all of a sudden, as they get older and transition into adults or young men, you're forced to have that conversation. You don't have a choice but to have that conversation. And it's sad that in 2020 that we're still talking about this, but you tell them, you have to educate them about what happened when they get stopped by a police officer. You know, as Swin is saying, you know, roll down the window, put your hands on the steering wheel, turn on your phone and record the whole thing. If they ask you for your driver's license and registration, tell them it's in the glove compartment, that they're welcome to come around and open the glove compartment and get it themselves. Or it's in my pocket, I'll step out of the car and get it. There's no way that we should be having these conversations in 2020. I mean, you know, we shouldn't, but to keep my two sons safe, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to say that. I'm willing to understand that, you know, right now, that's the only way that you could possibly keep them safe. And even there's no guarantee, even in those situations, that they're still safe. And, you know, it makes you angry to have those conversations. But, you know, for protection, you actually have to do it.
John, my sons are 12 and 8. And Griff was nice enough to allow them to come on the trip earlier this year when we went to Memphis. And I really targeted that trip because of the Civil Rights Museum. And so the three of us went there the morning of the game. And like Alvin said, you never know when to have those talks. And for me, that was like, well, gosh, this is a perfect scenario where they can come on a trip with the team and hang out with Dad for a couple of days, but I can also educate them on the history of African-American plight in this country. And at 12 and 8, they don't understand the images they're seeing. They've never, my 8-year-old, he had no idea. I think my 12-year-old at the time, he could start understanding that. I've talked to him about slavery and people coming over on the passage and the millions of people that died on that trip. And then lo and behold, 3 months later, here we are, where you are now forced to have that discussion. You cannot not have that discussion about, we're here today and let's educate ourselves on why we are here and what this movement means and why is it so strong and why is it such an important time. My wife and I have always told our boys, treat other people as you would have them treat yourself, the golden rule. And that you don't care about race, religion, background, socioeconomic status. It's about treating people with the proper respect that you would have them treat you. And so they're confused. They don't understand why somebody would be treated differently just because of the color of their skin. So you do have to go back, you have to educate the kids and have them at least understand why we are where we are today and what we can do to make a change going forward. But unfortunately, we do have to have those conversations, and it's kind of been probably thrust in which is a good thing, in everybody's lap right now to have those conversations, and hopefully as a country and as a planet, we can continue these conversations going forward.
John, I think one of the big issues facing all of us and everyone on the panel is education. I'm a 50-year-old man who grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, in a primarily Hispanic neighborhood. Went to Catholic parochial school for junior high school, and then went to a Jesuit high school, and kind of worked my way through all of high school. I did not ever have any opportunity to hear about the massacres at Black Wall Street in Tulsa as a child. It was never once part of the education curriculum at all. It wasn't until I went to the Civil Rights Museum as an adult and started to read more about the civil rights movement in general when I was early in college that I had even heard about it. But it was never part of a curriculum in school for young kids. And I mean, that's devastating for me to think about the curriculum that's being put together largely by people of white privilege that are choosing not to tell the full story to kids all over the country who, frankly, kids aren't born with hate, right? They're taught that. And most kids, most human beings have human empathy. So this has to start with educating kids from the time they're very young. And as soon as they can understand what it means to be compassionate for someone, to let them understand how difficult it is to be a person of color in this country. Trajan and I have talked about this, and I've probably talked to Alvin about it as well, but what Swin just said about Saint and her husband Steve being a big guy, so Saint's gonna grow up to be 6'7". Saint doesn't have to be an athlete. If he's 6'7" and he is standing in an airport, everyone will look at him as though he's somebody. Who's he? He's got to be somebody. Just understanding that African Americans live with that alone can lend a sense of empathy that people need to have and an understanding they need to have. But until you hear those stories and until you're exposed to it, you just don't understand. So when we use the word listening, we use the word education, that's really what it's about. Too much of this country grows up completely blind to the privilege they live with. And I'm one of those people. I didn't choose to be that way. It's how we were educated.
So piggybacking on that, is there a feeling or sense that this point in time right now is a flashpoint or a turning point, or however you want to phrase it, for America to begin to gain that empathy and to begin to pursue that understanding and try to figure out a better way for everyone to live? Is that a sense? Because I know it's difficult to kind of put a cap on it when you're in the midst of it, you know, at the beginning of it or whatever point, but a lot of times you'll see movement that will peter out. But does this feel like it has the sustainability to where everyone can kind of get a sense of where this movement is going and really kind of agree on it?
I do. I get that feeling, and I'll tell you why. Because I remember how this country was moved and how the protests happened after Philandro Castile and Alton Sterling died. And I remember being in the WNBA, and I remember the protests, and I remember even from Eric Garner. And there was a sense of a movement, and people were out there protesting, and there was Black Lives Matter, and they were organizing. But then America was allowed to just continue on its way, right? Continue with your day-to-day. You didn't have to see it for a 24-hour news cycle because you were able to go to work. You were able to enjoy your restaurants and enjoy, your entertainment. Whatever you want to do, your life wasn't directly affected. Well, because of COVID-19, because everything was shut down, it had to be front and center, in your face, day in and day out. And so you had to start thinking. I mean, as a human being, when you start seeing images of people dying left and right, when you start seeing why the system is not fairly equal to Black and brown people, why this is happening or that's happening. It makes you question, what do I want this country to be, not only for myself, but for our future children and grandchildren? And I think it was a perfect storm of things that happened in order for us to address it. And now, because people have opened their eyes and they have a clearer understanding to a point, the protests have continued, and people are demanding change from not only our policies, but corporations. Do you see now that there were so many corporations before they were able to issue a statement and then they were done? Where the demand is different now, where it's like, no, we don't only want you to issue a statement. What does your corporate board look like? What does, your engagement with your minority workers look like? And so I think that is the change that we're starting to see, is that people are more engaged and structurally trying to fix what's broken.
Plus, I also think that you have a lot of whites now that are actually asking questions and want to be educated. And, my son has friends that have sat down with him and talked for hours about, explain this to me. We invited you to a debutante ball, and, you're basically the only, you can call it biracial, but it's Black. He's the only Black kid there, and how did that make you feel? And, we never even thought about that, until, you were, until we went through this whole thing that we're going through right now. So I think there's a lot of young people that's talking. Me and my son participated in the protest last Saturday, from City Park to down to a police precinct. Probably 4,000 people there. I would say it's almost half and half, really. A lot of young, white kids are, they're engaged in this, and I think they feel like they can be the change, and they're asking questions, and they want to be educated, and it starts there. But obviously, we have to get to the adults, and we have to get to the adult white males if this thing is going to ever change. They're the ones that's got to be educated to understand, that when you walk into a store, they look at you like something may happen. And even in our situation, and, NBA players, NBA coaches or whatever, what everyone has to understand is that we're Black first. We're Black men before we're anything. So when you walk in, until they realize, oh my God, he's the coach of the Pelicans, you're looked at as just a Black man. And so anything can happen from there. And we've seen that happen with players, Sterling Brown in Milwaukee, things like that. So we've got to understand that. But the change is not going to happen. It is a white problem, and they have to be educated, and we've got to help them. We have to help educate them, I think.
I think it's going to take time. But I think that we have to be persistent in this effort. And it's amazing to see what's going on, not only in our country, but around the globe right now in different countries talking about Black Lives Matter, especially you see the protests in France, you see them. It's amazing to see how many people are on the streets understanding what's going on right now in the world just is not right, and we have to do better. But before we started recording, gotten on the call, I was talking to Alvin and Swin and Griff about my family and I. We drove through Alabama the other day, and when you're on the interstate and you see the sign Selma, and we stopped in Montgomery, and you understand that that's a 50-mile drive, and the people marched that in the civil rights movement, and you understand the history of the Montgomery bus boycotts and the fire that happened, and that took almost 360 days for the protests to get to the Supreme Court and to have them overturn desegregated buses. I should say segregated buses so they could be desegregated from then on. It's amazing the amount of time that took. I do think if everybody bands together, things will happen quicker. And like Swin said, people are holding corporations accountable to the statements that they're making. They can't just make a statement and say, okay, we made a nice statement, we're going to keep going on as usual. People are educating themselves through social media, and it's spreading like wildfire, the images that are seen across the nation. So I think we're just going to have to be persistent and keep on with the messages. And I think that's what we've done internally here with the Pelicans too, is what things do we want to do that are, what coalition or what alliance we want to put together so our players can be more active and voice their concerns, and then we can get behind them and we can actually create change. So I think that's one step, but we do have to understand that we do have to effectuate change. We can't just say it. We have to act. We can't just talk the talk. We need to walk the talk and actually get some things done.
Now, we're on this panel, we're also blessed to be part of the NBA, and an organization that certainly under Adam Silver's leadership has cared mightily about social justice and about giving players a platform to voice their opinion about things they're passionate about. And part of the restart is that we get an incredible platform at a time when, as Swin mentioned, sort of the convergence of COVID and social justice. We're coming back with a platform at a time when the world is starving for entertainment. So we're going to be center stage. Our players, our league are going to be center stage in a really powerful way. And because we're the league we are, I know we're going to use that platform to try to drive change and to continue the conversation. I'm honored to be part of that. But I think what Swin and Trajan alluded to in terms of the corporate aspect of this, when Killer Mike spoke in Atlanta very early on in the situation, he said something about apartheid dying in large part because Coca-Cola pulled out of South Africa, that the African-American population in Atlanta made it clear to Coca-Cola, it is no longer acceptable to us that you support apartheid. And that's part of how we're going to make this change, is we're going to hold people accountable in a way we haven't before. And that's a small thing that we can do. It's a small step, but it could have a really big impact.
Personally, how has the last month or so affected you guys? I know for myself, it seems like every day I run the gamut of emotions. I might see something that brings me to tears. I might see something that makes me laugh. I might see something that, brings out a range of emotions. And by the end of every day, I feel like I'm exhausted, just totally wiped out. And that's like a separate unit every day that I go through that range of emotions. Has it been that way for you all, or am I just kind of, all over the place here?
I think it's that way for everyone right now. There's always something else that you see on TV or you read about or you actually experience. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think there's anything bad with that, because I think when your emotions is high, then, in my case, when my emotions is high, I want to try to find some solution or some way to help. I mean, that's why I'm involved now. I had a long meeting with the sheriff yesterday, and we talked for 2 hours. I went to his office. We talked for 2 hours. We talked about everything. We talked about the good. We talked about the bad. I talked about, police brutality and how it has to stop. And I talked about how, can we help police be better accepted, and, what situations we can go in. And I think that it just still gets back to communication and education, I think. So whether the emotions are high, low, whatever, the bottom line is that it still comes down to, we got to educate, and then we got to have actions.
I think there's been tough days. There's been some days that have been really, really hard for me. Just looking at images and understanding that, look, these are some of the same images that we saw in the civil rights movement. Now, are we in a better place as a country? Yes, but are we still going through the same struggles and seeing the same images? Absolutely, which is daunting. We talk about how long ago that was, and that some people out there just really don't want to make the change because they don't want to be uncomfortable. That's hard. That I struggle with that. That we can't just look at each other as human beings and treat each other the same, and have it not be based on the color of our skin or our socioeconomic status, so forth. But like I said, there's been hard days, there's been better days, but I think overall, like Alvin said, it's brought an awareness to the world and awareness to our country that things have to change. It's brought a lot of people together, and it's created conversations that have to keep going for change to happen in this country. And there have been actions. Even, people are starting to talk about Confederate leaders and bases being named after them and statues that are being up. Those kind of things, they do have to change because those things symbolize the hatred that's been in our country for so many years.
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback on what Trajan said, we're all in the business of sports here. And when you talk about just the idea of these statues and the Confederate flag and all those different things, it's kind of laughable to me because, you know, when we play sports, we don't hang banners and put things up of people who finish second. You know, like you win a championship, you get a banner, you get a trophy, and you look around our country and it's like, why are you celebrating? And people are like, well, this is history. Well, why are you celebrating somebody that finished second? You know, like they didn't win. And so I think you start putting it kind of those terms, people are starting to think about it differently. And a lot of it is just really generation after generation, people pass on stories or reasons why you should care about things. It's like a recipe. You know, my grandma's grandma passed this down. And I remember being at home with my mom at one point and being like, why do we eat this on this day? And why do we do X, Y, and Z? And she would just be like, oh, because my mom did it. And so you start questioning, you start asking more questions and you unravel it all. And you're like, this makes absolutely no sense. Well, I think that's what's happening right now with all of the statues of these generals, the Confederate flag. It's like, let's actually make some common sense here happen. And then let's address these things and just take them down. Like America needs to head in a different direction where there's truth, transparency, and honesty about the wounds from the past, but how we can build for the future. I think people are scared to talk about slavery because they think every Black person is angry or mad because, you know, 400 years ago, this happened. No, every Black person is angry and mad about what's happening right now. We want right now to change in order for it to be a better future. I'm not holding, you know, my white counterparts, I'm not holding them responsible for what happened to my ancestors in slavery. But what I'm asking you to do is care about the fact of how we move forward. And I think those are the kind of conversations that we need to have because, you know, I had one of my close friends, one of my best friends, and she's white. And she talked to me about, you know what, I feel so bad because I know it's wrong, but I don't know what to say. And I just want to encourage anybody that's listening to this, you don't have to have the right words. Please listen, but at the same time, express yourself so we can help get to that next level. Like conversation has to happen. And I don't want people to be out there fearing that because they don't have the right words or the right understanding, that they can't be a part of the solution. You can be. Educate yourself, listen, and then you can learn and then move forward.
John, the question you asked about it feeling like there's just one more thing every day, something piles on, some major event that happens, you know, the spiking of the numbers again relative to COVID now, and one more protest and one more police brutality incident and one more school shooting and one more mass gun violence situation. And people get numb and desensitized over time to seeing these things historically. And what I hope comes from this particular point in time is that we realize we could be running out of time to end racism. This has gone on for 500 years, 400 years in this country. And the reality is at this point, the way we are politicized and the way we are so polarized as a country in terms of how we consume information, we could have advance notice and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that an extinction event awaited us 5 years from now. And we would vilify each other while sharing that news, and we would never do anything about it because we're trying to vilify the other rather than empathize with and love the other. And if we can't get to the point where we can fix that, I believe COVID is like a warm-up for what the real pandemic's gonna be. If we can't get through this together, we're going to die alone. That's how it's going to be. So we've got to decide we're gonna fold time and get over ourselves and move on to something bigger. This is not something so insurmountable that we can't overcome it. We literally just have to try to be better every day in this space so that we can continue to listen to each other and can continue to accept information instead of vilifying the source of that information. And historically, that's the game plan. That's what's been done in this country for this entire time.
You know, we're at Juneteenth 2020 now. It has the date really begun to resonate now nationally. I know for me, maybe 10, 12 years ago was when I really got an understanding of it. Before then, I just thought it was a Texas day. And now I really understand what it actually is? Has it gained the importance that it should now?
I think the sad thing about, the Juneteenth thing is that we're talking about 1865. I think in Texas, if I'm not mistaken, they celebrated in 1862. But, you talk about the Emancipation Proclamation and freeing of the slaves. So if the progress we made from then, 155 years later to right now, to me, that's slow as hell. We got to do a much better job than to go from being freed in 1865 to where we are right now. I think there's got to be a big, big jump, and it has to happen a hell of a lot faster than 155 years. That's the way I look at it.
And then I would look at it also to try to make some positive, a positive spin on it, would be that we've had more corporations, more organizations acknowledge what Juneteenth is and give paid leave to their employees to then create this movement for it to hopefully be a national kind of holiday. So I look at that as a positive, because just in this amount of time of these couple of months, when you talk about, and Griff talked about it when Killer Mike, what did he say, Griff? He talked about the planning, the plotting, organizing, and it was
plan and strategize.
And so people have consistently been having demands to different corporations and companies, and immediately you see all these companies now. You've seen the press releases. Juneteenth, all our employees are off now. I'm getting in my inbox from different people and companies I've worked for before, and I'm like, what? So the positive spin on that is, yes, absolutely agree with Coach. It's taken so long to get there, but now that we're here, people are starting to put demands and things they want out front, and you're seeing that there's more reaction in quicker time, I would say.
Yeah, I think I agree with Swin and Coach on that. I think the biggest thing for me is, again, just the awareness and the education of what's going on in our country. I remember growing up and there'd be Juneteenth celebrations in Anchorage, in an area downtown they called the Park Strip. And you knew the only people that understood what was going on were the people in that party. It could be Hispanics, it could be white people playing up. They had no idea what Juneteenth meant. And I assume that it's been that way for years and years in this country. You see Juneteenth, but you have no idea, oh, it's just some Black people getting together for a barbecue in June, and that's what Juneteenth is. Well, I think now everybody, well, hopefully, a lot more people will be educated on the meaning of Juneteenth going forward and how important it is for the African-American people and the African-American culture in this country. And I think that right there is meaningful going forward. And hopefully, like I said, people will start asking, well, what is the significance of it? They look into it, they ask questions of people that they know, and they educate themselves. And hopefully that starts, then they can educate their friends. And all of a sudden they're educating 30 other people that were ignorant about the meaning of that holiday. So I think that in itself is meaningful, especially happening at this time.
That's a very, very powerful wrap and very important conversation with New Orleans Pelicans executives Swin Cash, David Griffin, Trajan Langdon, and Coach Alvin Gentry. Thank you very much for joining us here on this Juneteenth 2020. And let's remember, let's not just talk, let's also listen.